Ahoy hoy DNA, your salty captain Kate Wilson here with another episode of All Access DNA. Today we are talking to Dan Dry Doc Shockley, him, about why he decided to have his large intestine removed, what attenuated familial adenomatous polyposis is, and how his naval training enabled Dan to adapt, improvise, and overcome. Dan is a retired Navy veteran who was diagnosed with a hereditary colon cancer syndrome 13 years ago. He now works to normalize and reduce stigma around ostomies, as well as educating the medical community about AFAP. We also realize how much the military and genetic fields love acronyms. Let's get started. So, welcome to All Access DNA, Dan. I appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share my journey on your platform.
First of all, I'll let the listeners know that I have actually followed you for a bit on LinkedIn, and I've seen some of the posts, reposts, discussions that you're engaged with, and I can tell you're a passionate advocate for a condition that's called attenuated FAP or AFAP. So I thought we'd start there. If you can tell us what attenuated FAP is before we get into your story.
Absolutely. Yeah, attenuated FAP is a autosomal dominant germline mutation. It's a subvariant of FAP, and AFAP was discovered by the late Dr. Henry T. Lynch, who is the founding father of hereditary cancer research. Lynch syndrome, it's named after him. Well, a lot of folks don't realize that he is also credited with the discovery of attenuated FAP. In 1984, he received a grant from the American Cancer Society, which 6 years later led to his discovery of attenuated FAP being a subvariant of FAP. And early in his days, he suspected in the early 60s, he suspected that a lot of his patients were passing away of colon cancer, and he thought that colon cancer may not just be environmental, maybe hereditary. So he started applying for grants, and then he kept getting turned down. And then, fortunately, years later, he was able to prove that there is a basis for his theory that colon cancer is actually hereditary as well as environmental. So that's what I know about it. I'm not a medical professional. I'm just a very attentive patient, and I ask lots of questions. And I have a binder I carry with me, and now it's up to 100 pages, double-sided, that I take to all my appointments. I hope that does that help out.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate that you're sharing the perspective as a patient, because there are certain things that you're going to take away from conversations with your doctors that I think it's good for the audience to know, so we're not always coming at things from a provider perspective, right? Because we're there to work with patients and to help families with hereditary conditions like hereditary cancer. And what I know is with FAP, it stands for familial adenomatous polyposis, which just means more than one polyp potentially may be seen in the colon that could become cancer. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, well, the actual mutation itself, I should back up. It's a no pun intended. Ad- Adenomatous polyposis coli. It's in the fifth chromosome. Now, it depends on your age and, of course, family history and whether you're symptomatic. Now, um, Dr. Lynch has shared with me that 50 to 55 is the range. If you're diagnosed with the mutation APC, then you'll be known to have attenuated FAP. I was 51 and a half years old, so I was right in that window. I've been asymptomatic all along, and there's no family history. FAP 50 and younger, and a lot of my colleagues who have FAP are symptomatic and have family history. So Dr. Lynch has shared with me that it's quite possible the mutation started with me, and it's going to end with me because I don't have any biological children. So that's what I know about that.
Well, I would say that's a lot actually. So,
Yeah.
and you mentioned the gene is the APC gene. So, changes in that gene are what lead to either this FAP or attenuated FAP. You mentioned that it was new, or you're the person in your family, the only one that you know of that has it. How did you find out that you have attenuated FAP?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Now, when I was 50 years old, I knew through the Veterans Administration healthcare system, I registered with them when I retired. I was 43, and I go in for annual checkups, and I was always reminded to consider having a colonoscopy when you turn 50. I said, absolutely, I have no reservations. When I turned 50, I scheduled it. So what happened from the previous year's physical, there was a 14-pound unexpected weight loss. Then my GI doctor wanted to do not just a colonoscopy, he wanted to do an upper GI as well to rule out any underlying issues. Now, keep in mind, like I said, I was asymptomatic and had no idea of any of this was going on. I didn't know anything about it. So when I woke up in a colonoscopy, my GI doctor was by my bed in the recovery room. I was sedated. As I'm waking up, drinking some guava juice and eating animal crackers, he says, "Now, Daniel, I found 100 polyps embedded throughout your colon, rectum, and anus, and one of those polyps in your ascending colon is causing an 80% blockage." And I said, "Well, doc, what are you talking about? How can all this be going on? And I don't know, I don't feel anything." He says, "Well, I'm going to refer you to the certified genetic counselor at Tripler Army Medical Center." Now, keep in mind, I was in Hawaii. The medical center, the VA medical center, is on the campus at Tripler. So I went over for my appointment, and the genetic counselor, there's only five certified genetic counselors in Hawaii. One of them was assigned to the Army. And
Mhm.
Tripler is a flagship hospital for the military in the Pacific Theater. I went in, had a meeting with the genetic counselor. She brought in a colorectal surgeon, and she said, "Well, we think you have a mutation known as FAP." And of course, I didn't know how, I just go with acronyms. I didn't know how to say any familial adenomatous polyposis. So she said, "We think you have that. However, we won't know for sure until we have the DNA germline test conducted." Now, the closest lab, molecular oncology lab, is in Pasadena, California. And she said it's going to take about 3 weeks to get the results back. And I said, "Okay, well, give me some information, give me some resources, credible resources that I can read about this mutation." And of course, they shared with me, if you have the mutation, it's in the best practice of medicine to have a total proctocolectomy with a permanent ileostomy, meaning, to take out the colon, rectum, and anus, and then you have a permanent ostomy. And then so I didn't know anything about that. And then they said, then you're going to have this permanent ostomy. So, being the military mindset, I broke this down into three phases. I wanted to learn as
Mhm.
much as I could about the mutation they thought I had, the type of surgery, and then life having an ostomy. Now, through the course of the next month, the results came back in 6 weeks. Okay, so I had an open door with my genetic counselor, my colorectal surgeon, the chief of surgery, the my GI doctor, and my primary care. So I was asking lots of questions through the course of the time before the results came in. So the reading that I did revealed to me that any of those polyps, if I had the mutation, any of those polyps have a 100% chance of developing a colon cancer if they're left unattended. So I had 100 polyps,
Mhm.
and one of them, like I said, was a large mass in my ascending colon. I was called in to see my genetic counselor and colorectal surgeon when the results came in, and they said, "Well, you have the mutation. Now you're 51, so
Mm.
based on your age, you're diagnosed with attenuated FAP. You have the APC mutation, and you need the total proctocolectomy surgery. You don't have to have it, but the longer you wait, the older you get, the higher chance of the polyps turning and developing the colon cancer." I said, "Well, I want the surgery." My surgeon, my
Mhm.
colorectal surgeon, looks at me. He goes, "Daniel, that's what I thought you'd say. I've already scheduled your surgery. It's 2 weeks from today." So I had the surgery. It was a little over 6 hours. When I woke up, I knew where I was. I knew, what was going on. And the first question I asked my team around me was, did Dr. Gagliano find everything he's looking for? And they said, "Well, he'll be in a little bit to talk to you." So then, as we talked, the chief of surgery came in to see me, and the whole staff. I was, had lots of folks, medical professionals come in to see me, and I just was asking lots of questions, and that started my journey. Then I had my ostomy nurse start to educate me. I mean, I've read about all this stuff, but reading theory is one thing, but practical application is another. And that started my journey. And I'd already started reaching out to various, United Ostomy Associations of America, Colon Cancer Alliance, among others, see where this journey is going to take me, because I knew it was going to be a lifelong, journey, and I didn't know who Dr. Henry T. Lynch was. So once I started reading more, so then I've embraced this diagnosis from the onset. I tend not to think about things I'm unable to control, such as medical conditions. What I can control is my positive attitude. And after this many decades on God's green earth, it brought me this far. Why change now?
Well, and I was going to ask because I was sharing with you. So I have a few military individuals in my family. In fact, I'm married to one. So I'm not surprised to hear how you tackle it with dividing it into phases and going from kind of, okay, let's gather information and continue to move forward. Was it a challenge at all to adjust from, oh, I went in for a routine colonoscopy to now I'm going to have surgery to remove my colon?
Well, I mean, I didn't know anything about it, and my military
Yeah.
experience has equipped me to adapt, improvise, and overcome. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. I mean, I've been
Mm-hmm.
deployed to the Persian Gulf 4 different times between 1992 and 2003. So, not knowing anything about this, I went into battle mode in a positive way because I wanted to gather information. One of the things I've learned later in my life, in the last 3 decades, is we have two choices. We can react or we can respond. And by responding, you gather information so you can make a logical decision versus reacting where you make a rash decision you may later regret. Well, I was responding by gathering this information and educating myself about it. However, the more I read, the more I researched it, the I realized that this is a rare mutation, and I wanted to learn more. And that's why I was, connected with Creighton University, Johns Hopkins, among some of the resources. So that that intrigued me because I'm like, well, okay, what is this, and why no one in my family knows about it. My parents have passed away, as well as my maternal and paternal relatives. I'm the youngest of my two siblings, and I'm the youngest of my first cousins. So I've shared through the last 12, going on 13 years, with my first cousins and my siblings everything that I'm going through, so they can share it with their GI doc and their medical team. So, but that's what started all this. But the more I read, the more I tried to research this and try to find out what's going on, not just locally but internationally. Then that really took me to a whole new level, and I'm like, I've been on that. Just keep building from there. So I hope that makes sense.
It does. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you've been working on locally, but also internationally, especially I think in the context of not necessarily having family members that also have a diagnosis, or potentially when you were first got the diagnosis, you're in Hawaii, and there may not have been as many, like you said, testing labs. There was a clinic there, but how do you find support? How do you find other people that also have attenuated FAP?
Well, I actually don't even know anybody personally that has a attenuated FAP. I've heard through channels through the years of individuals who have it. I know a few digitally, virtually, that we communicate that have FAP. But what I wanted to focus on was to educate the medical students because of this, then continuing the legacy of Dr. Lynch on the importance of early detection in hopes of saving lives. So that's what I've been focusing on for the last 8, 9 years. So I've had the opportunity to be a live case presentation for Perelman School of Medicine in Philadelphia, Rutgers Students for Rare, the University of Michigan Genetic Hereditary Testing. I've been on their advisory board for many years. University of Texas Health Center in San Antonio. I've been a live case presentation for their GI students in their third year residency for 4 of the last 6 years. And recently I've been invited to Stanford University School of Medicine to be a live case presentation for their Molecular Foundations of Medicine course, as well as a recording of my presentation for the Stanford Master of Science program. And that's an addendum to their online curriculum that they started using this past fall, and they'll be using that indefinitely.
Hmm.
And I've been invited to be at Stanford School of Medicine every September from here on out. And then there's many other opportunities. Recently, I was selected by the American Society of Clinical Pathology to be a patient advocate for them. So I've been collaborating with them over the last couple months. So we'll be doing some interesting things. The Harvard School of Medicine genomes research program. I've been selected to be a virtual live case presentation for them, and that's just to name a few. I've been doing a lot of ambassador opportunities with the United Ostomy Associations of America. I've been sponsored by my local Senator Roger Nealo, and I reside in his district. So a year and a half ago, I asked if he would sponsor a commemorative message designating Ostomy Awareness Day. It's the first Saturday of every October. And in 2023, he said, I'll not only sponsor your request, but I will author a Senate concurrent resolution. And then he invited me to the state capitol in Sacramento, and he introduced the measure on the Senate floor, and it passed 37-0. And then I was in the gallery, and then he read my bio and he introduced me to the Senate floor, and they videoed it and sent me the links to it. And then I followed that up the following year,
Hmm.
which was a year ago, to have March designated as Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month in the state of California. So I was invited back to the Capitol again,
Hmm.
and so he had the Senate concurrent resolutions framed, and I have them hanging in the hallway. Now, speaking of the Senate concurrent resolutions, I've partnered with a colleague in Michigan who is part of the University of Michigan Genetic Hereditary Testing Advisory Board, and he has FAP. He's a couple years older than me. In family history, his dad just passed away a year and a half ago at 95 years old. And if my memory serves me, he is the oldest FAP patient in the country when he passed away. So what my colleague Kevin did is he wanted to designate the third week of June as FAP Awareness Week. And that's because his dad's birthday was the third week of June, and how fitting. So I asked him if I could have the opportunity to see if Senator Nealo would sponsor that request. And so I had contacted his staff last fall, and they said, let's wait till after the new year. So I provided the wording to Senator Nealo's chief of staff. And before I did that, I reached out to my certified genetic counselor at Stanford, because I've been assigned to one since I'm a patient at Stanford. And so I received their blessing. So their Stanford University Department of Health and Genomics Department is actually mentioned in the Senate concurrent resolution. So we're going to wait until hopefully sometime in May, and because it's on the agenda for this legislative session. So that's where we're at. So we'll see
Okay.
where that goes.
I was like, all right. Well, I was like, I'll look for it, but keep me posted too, because that would be I think big for awareness too,
Mm,
is to have that awareness week for FAP.
absolutely, yeah. And then whatever colleagues I have in Northern California, they're more than welcome to attend. We got plenty of room in the gallery.
So it seems that you've been really focused on not just raising awareness, but also education of healthcare providers. So the people that may pick up cases like this, or that may find somebody, right, with no family history, they're coming in for a routine screening, and making them aware that this is a condition they should look out for or should be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And given the patient's perspective, because how many times do the medical professionals and medical students, they're reading, this theory for years and
Mm-hmm.
decades, right? So I felt that since Dr. Lynch had this idea back in the early 60s that colon cancer may not just be environmental, it may be hereditary. I mean, he didn't get his grant to do the research to discover attenuated FAP. He got the grant in '84, and then 6 years later led to the discovery. So I was born in 1960, so up until the time Dr. Lynch passed away in 2019, my entire life he's been devoted to hereditary cancer research. So I figured, well, since he considered me a colleague, and we were both in the Navy, of course, different time frames. He was in the
Mhm.
Navy in World War II. He joined in 1944. At 16 years old, he used a relative's ID card to get in. He served 2 years on active duty in three different theaters. And a couple months after he'd been in, they realized
Mhm.
that he was underage. They said, "Oh, you're already in. We'll let you stay." And then when he got out, while he was in, he was boxing. Okay, they named him. His name was Hammer and Hank. This is way before
Huh.
Hank Aaron. So when he got out, he was boxing. He's 6'5", and he married his neighborhood sweetheart. Remember, he didn't finish high school, so he didn't have a GED. I don't even know if they had GEDs back then. So he was boxing, and his wife Jane has said, "Henry, this boxing gig is going to cut it. You need to get a profession." So he went to the VA and he started getting funding to go to school. So he ended up, if you remember, he ended up getting a degree in clinical psychology, and then he got a degree in genetics, and then he was a proctologist. Okay, so those were all things that led up to before he started his theory that colon cancer may not just be environmental, may be hereditary. And then that was in the early 60s. So fast forward from 1960 to 1984. So 24 years had already gone by, and he already discovered, he already been credited with the discovery of Lynch syndrome. And so, now he's got the attenuated FAP, the discovery under his belt as well. And so I thought, well, the more individuals, medical professionals, medical students that I talk to are not that familiar with. And every time you mention Dr. Lynch, they say, "Oh, Lynch syndrome." So I said, "Well, yes, he's discovered Lynch, it's named after him. However, he's also credited with." And they said, "Well, tell me about this AFAP." And so I said, "Well, I'm 64 now. Of course, when I was diagnosed, I was 51. I said, well, how about if I dedicate, my sharing my journey with medical students, because then they'll have that for the rest of their career and for the rest of their lives.
Mhm.
Because if we start early, because I'm living in the most perfect time because Dr. Lynch, I got to meet him, and so I figured, well, for the rest of my time, I want to help educate medical students, and not just locally but internationally. So that's what I thought would be the most important thing, because the medical students get to hear about my diagnosis, from a patient's perspective, that I'm living with a permanent ostomy.
Mhm.
AFAP, FAP, they're rare diseases, so how does all that impact, my life? And like I said, my military experience has equipped me to adapt, improvise, and overcome. And I've been doing a pretty good job of it so far. So here we are.
And you talked about being an ambassador for the ostomy advocacy group. I'm sorry
Mm.
if I can't recall the name.
United Ostomy Association of America.
That's it, United Ostomy Associations of America. So tell me a little bit about some of the work that you do for them, and what is some of the messaging or awareness you want to get out about living with an ostomy?
Well, the most important part for me is to help silence the stigma of living with an ostomy, whether it's permanent or temporary, whether the surgery was planned or unplanned. My surgery was planned and it's permanent. So I knew that going into it. But there's a lot of patients that they end up having an accident and they end up having emergency surgery, and they wake up and they have a colostomy or an ileostomy. And whether it's permanent or temporary, it all depends on their diagnosis. But I want to help silence the stigma. There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. And this is a life-saving, life-changing surgery. And so through the decade, actually going on 13 years now, I've been an advocate for the United, or ambassador for the United Ostomy Associations of America. So in the different towns, the different states that I've resided in since my diagnosis, I've reached out to my local mayor and the governor to receive a proclamation designating that first Saturday of every October as Ostomy Awareness Day. So, I ended up relocating to California from Hawaii because the one of the procedures that I need for my routine endoscopic surveillance is not available in Hawaii. So the VA was flying me to Palo Alto VA hospital, and the director of the GI clinic performs either a single or a double blind enteroscopy. That procedure is not available in any clinic in Hawaii. So I knew with communicating with Dr. Lynch, the older I got, the more likely I'd be a candidate for what we know as the Whipple procedure. 4 years ago, my surveillance, I was having surveillance every year. 4 years ago, my surveillance revealed a 3 centimeter adenoma in my jejunum. I was recommended to consider surgery. So I thought it was going to be the Whipple procedure. And my GI doctor said, well, there's a newer technology and it's called a pancreas sparing duodenectomy resection surgery. So I ended up getting accepted at Stanford. And I had one of the leading pancreatic cancer surgeons in the nation that did my pancreas sparing duodenectomy resection surgery. And so now I'm a patient at Stanford for the rest of my life. But I'm trying to get the word out there, the general public, globally, that having an ostomy, like I said, there's nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be embarrassed about, and you can go about your daily activities almost as if nothing happened. I mean, I hardly think about mine. It's just, and that's just, but I've embraced this from the onset. It's all up to the individual. However, by me sharing my journey, whoever hears my presentation or reads about it, my hopes are that it's a source of inspiration and encouragement for them. And then they can decide, once again, it's a matter of choice, of whether they want to react or respond. And it's difficult, you know.
Mhm.
However, you know, my military experience is the main reason I feel that's afforded me the opportunity to adapt, improvise, and overcome.
And I think it's important you talking about the awareness and your story of having an ostomy, like you said, to kind of destigmatize it. Because I do think about some relatives that I had that had colon cancer or were hesitant to have certain treatments because they remembered seeing ostomies back. I mean, my guess would be when they were starting out in the 60s, or even 50s. And technology that we have definitely evolves and changes and gets better. So I think it's helpful to hear your perspective and now having had one for, like you said, over a decade, what that experience has been like.
Yeah, absolutely. I have fun with it too because I consider myself an amateur botanist. Okay, so I love sugar snap peas, and of course I was doing some reading. And I remember in biology class, high school. So what do plants and ostomates have in common? We both have a stoma. In the botany world, it's called a stomata. So, and then when I mentioned the sugar snap peas, well, I've been reading about Gregor Mendel, the founding father of genetics. Okay, he's been giving peas a chance since 1865. So I actually have in our garden every fall here in Northern California, I have sugar snap peas growing, and I enjoy that. But that's another therapeutic opportunity I have out there. But I kind of put together. I have a stoma. Hey, my plants have a stoma. Hey, so have fun with it. But that's just me.
Hmm.
I take things at a different angle. And humor is a big
Right.
piece. Humor is the best medicine. I'm not on any medication. There's no cure for the APC mutation. And I mean, Dr. Lynch has shared with me through the years that we just go in there to do the surveillance, so my first surgery, they removed my colon, rectum, and anus. That was the total proctocolectomy with permanent ileostomy. My next surgery was 4 years ago, and that pancreas sparing duodenectomy resection surgery was to remove 60 centimeters of my duodenum or duodenum, depends on who you talk to, what day of the week it
Hmm.
is, remove my gallbladder and redo the bile ducts. So I have a 5 French pancreatic stent that's been inserted when they redid my bile duct. And, I just, I'm fine from all the surgeries, and I just go about my life as if nothing happened.
Yeah. Well, you get the plumbing changed around, I guess, so to speak. And I
Oh, yeah.
appreciate your approach. You've talked about, how your military background has influenced kind of how you're facing the diagnosis, but also the treatment. You talk about moving forward using humor. So I know that you have a mantra because I've seen it written a few times. So I thought it'd be good if you could tell us a little bit more about this mantra and kind of how does that drive what you're doing in this world of advocacy and education.
My mantra is a positive spin on a bleak diagnosis. Always forge ahead with a purpose. And it's a hidden message there. If you take the first letter of each of those words, what's it spell? AFAP.
Oh yeah, I didn't even
So
realize that.
I had an epiphany the year after my surgery. I woke up in the middle of the night and the first two words on my mind were forge ahead. So I quickly turned on the nightlight, wrote down on a little pad, forge ahead. And I said, well, forge ahead, that's FA. Forge ahead. Then I put with a purpose. I said, well, that's FAP. I have AFAP. So what am I always doing? Oh, I'm always forging ahead with a purpose. And there you go. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But that's my mantra. That's my signature on my emails and lots of correspondence because
Mhm.
man, it just happened. I didn't plan it, I didn't. But I wanted to. I've always been reaching out to the masses, to the medical community, students and professionals globally. So any opportunity I get to share, and that that mantra really resonates, and that's me. That's who I am. That's
Mhm.
so. And I put it together with. I've shared that with Dr. Lynch in emails, through the years before he passed away, and he got a kick out of it.
And I think it's good to have that almost North Star or something that you can look at and go to and repeat because it does remind you what you're doing, what your purpose is, what you want to accomplish. And I think that that's definitely something I'm taking away from this conversation is continue to move forward, however that looks like for you, but continue to move forward and adapt.
Yeah, and actually, and the word adapt. I broke that down. I made an acronym out of that. Attitude determines the ability for a positive transformation.
Oh, I like
So,
that. I can also say that both the millet.
you know,
Go ahead.
no, you got it. The military had a lot to do with the acronyms.
I was going to say military and healthcare, I find both really love acronyms.
Yeah, but I have to be careful using AFAP in the Army setting because AFAP to the Army is
uh,
Army Family Action Plan. So I went into the PR. I went into the public relations office after my surgery. I had introduced myself and they said, "Would you be interested in doing a feature story?" And they said, "Sure. What's it going to be about?" And I said, "AFAP." And they go, "Well, you're a retired sailor. What does a retired sailor know about Army Family Action Plan?" I said, "What are you talking about? I have attenuated FAP." They said, "What is that?" So I said, so they did a feature article. They started out by saying, overcomes retired sailor with a bleak diagnosis overcomes adversity or something. And I was like, so I have fun with it.
yeah.
But globally, I Google acronyms, and AFAP, there's like six different acronyms. One is Australian Federation of whatever pilots or something, so all kinds. Anyway, yeah.
I say I'll spell it out in the show notes too, the full thing so that people can see it because doesn't the adenomatous polyposis doesn't roll off the tongue for those that
No,
aren't
that's
into the medical jargon.
right. Exactly. That's a lot to digest. No pun intended.
Well, and I think you've talked about a few different things about your journey with the diagnosis, the surgeries, but also your passion for working with the medical community. If people walk away today and they can only remember one thing, because I hope they remember more, but if they can only remember one thing, what is the thing that you want the general public to remember about the conversation?
My mantra: always forge ahead with a purpose.
I like it. Well, I appreciate you so much being here with us today, Dan. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about?
Well, there's a little side note that I could add. My journey having this mutation and reaching out to as many organizations individually as possible. I send out a lot of requests, and there's only a handful that have the opportunity to share. It kind of reminds me of an old saying. I'm like a woodpecker in a petrified forest. I'm keeping busy looking for opportunities.
I like it. And so there are opportunities out there. So if somebody does hear this and wants to chat with Dan more, I know you are very active on LinkedIn, and we can include some of your social media or get in touch with information in our show notes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Dan Drydock Shockley, and LinkedIn, Dan Drydock as well.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you being on the show today, and thank you so much for talking to us.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
For more information about this episode, visit allaccessdna.podbean.com, where you can also stream all episodes of the show. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/allaccessdna and consider donating to get bonus content, submit questions for our guests, and connect with other genetic curious individuals. Any inquiries on the podcast can be sent to allaccessdna@gmail.com. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. This helps other people like you discover the show. Note that this podcast is for entertainment and education and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please consult your physician with any questions you may have regarding your health. All Access DNA is an independent podcast hosted and produced by me, Kate Wilson. Designed by NKJ, created the logo. Thanks for listening, and join us next time.